Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Thomas H. Johnson volume, and we are now ready to turn to poem 454. It was given to me by the gods. Now, we are back to another riddle poem. What are we in reference to? It, I think, is probably another poem about poetry. But it's also another wrestling poem. Hey guys, do you remember when we did poem 59? A little east of Jordan, evangelists record, a gymnast and an angel did wrestle long and hard till morning touching mountain, and Jacob waxing strong, the angel begged permission to breakfast to return. Not so, said cunning Jacob, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me, stranger, that which acceded to. Light flung the silver fleeces, penal hills beyond, and the bewildered gymnast found he had worsted God. You'll remember this poem as a reference, of course, to that famous story where Jacob and the angel will have their famous wrestling match of Genesis 22 to 31. Now, we'll come to that story, and we'll come to the word wrestling in this poem. First, to our assumptions. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 453 poems. We just finished with 453, Love Thou Art High. And if you have, just like we said about poem 59, then you know that Emily has spent several of her poems already writing about poetry, okay, and herself as poet. Now, one of the driving questions of almost anybody that spends time studying the biography of Emily Dickinson is, when did Emily know? That is to say, when did she realize that she had a gift? She'll almost picture it like a coin that she holds onto. There's all kind of economics language in this poem. Somehow she must have known she was different. She will say that she was rich in this poem. And it is clear as well that there is a story for Emily that was unbelievably important, that also was really important to the great poet Milton. In lectures that we've given at learnstrong.net on Milton and Paradise Lost, we tell the story of how Milton was very impressioned by the story of the parable of the talents from Matthew 25, where a father has 3 sons, he's very wealthy, he leaves, to each of the sons he leaves a certain amount of money or talents, as it will be translated in the King James Version of the Bible, which Milton as well as Emily read. And when the father comes back, he asks his sons how they did, and the first 2 are able to take the amount of money that they were given and make more of it. And the third son is reported to have said, all I did was bury the money, and here's the exact same money back. And for that, he is in fact cursed. And we'll see this to some degree playing out with the idea of talents or gold in this poem. Now, of course, it isn't clear what the it of this poem is. Most people see it as maybe a referencing to a dawning sense of genius, is what one scholar has called it. Another is called, quote, childhood's visioning gift, and in quote, and we'll see. I think it does have to do with talent. She says it this way. It was given to me by the gods when I was a little girl. They give us presents most, you know, when we are new and small. I kept it in my hand. I never put it down. I did not dare to eat or sleep for fear it would be gone. I heard such words as rich when hurrying to school from lips at corners of the street, and wrestled with a smile. Rich. 'Twas myself was rich. To take the name of gold and gold to own in solid bars, the difference made me bold. Now, this is an interesting poem on a number of counts. Some scholars of Emily Dickinson love this as one of her most important poems to discuss the fact that she knew something important had happened for her, to her, at a very young age. She'll begin by saying, it was given to me by the gods. Now, it's fascinating that she doesn't use the word God here, but rather gods. And I think what she's doing is she's drawing on an ancient Greek tradition that we've spoken of many times in 303, where the gods are deemed as being, of course, immortal and having all kinds of knowledge, as opposed to humans that have very, very little of either of those two things. Clearly we're mortal and we have very little knowledge at all. However, sitting in between those two for the Greeks was the poet, the artist, the one who the gods have inspired, right? That is to say, God breathed, given some kind of information. And then the role of the artist or the poet is to translate information from the gods to humans. And this is exactly what Homer is doing in his invocation of the Muse as he begins both the Iliad and the Odyssey. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. So she'll begin with the gods. Now we saw this referencing of gods, not God, but gods, in poem 53, 263, 321, and 428 already. We'll see it again in 1260. We'll see it again in 1639, her referencing to the gods, which on one count, obviously, to devout Christian readers of her day, would have sounded blasphemous to say not God, but rather the gods. It was given to me by the gods when I was a little girl. Now, you'll remember little girl from poem 425. I'll just remind you. Good morning, midnight, I'm coming home. Day got tired of me. How could I have him? Sunshine was a sweet place I liked to stay, but morn didn't want me now, so good night, day. I can look, can't I? When the east is red, the hills have a way then that puts the heart abroad. You are not so fair, midnight. I chose day, but please take a little girl. He turned away. Little, we've said already, is one of Emily's favorite words, used in 171 poems. 576, when we get there, she says it this way. I prayed at first a little girl, because they told me to, but stopped when qualified to guess how prayer would feel to me. If I believe God looked around each time my childish eye fixed full and steady on his own in childish honesty. I told him what I'd like today, and parts of his far plan that baffled me, the mingled side of his divinity. And often since in danger I count the force 'twould be to have a God so strong as that to hold my life for me, till I could take the balance that tips so frequent now. It takes me all the while to pose, and then it doesn't stay. Whatever it is that she's referencing that doesn't stay will, I think, come back to this poem when we meet it. And finally, when we meet poem 613, a very famous poem, she says it this way. They shut me up in prose, as when a little girl they put me in the closet because they liked me still, could themselves have peeped and seen my brain go round. They might as wise have lodged a bird for treason in the pound. Himself was but to will, and easier as a star, abolish his captivity and laugh. No more have I. Notice here it's laughing, and in the poem that we're studying it's smiling. So she'll say, it was given to me by the gods when I was a little girl. Talent. They give us, it's almost like you would put parenthetics around this phrase. They give us, now who the us is interesting. They give us presents, notice capitalized, most, and then notice the you know. This you know she'll use in 23 of her poems. I love that you know. It's informal. That's why we call our series Chats with Emily. It's a very informal, you know, they give us presents, most, you know, when we are new and small, emphasizing again the use of the word small in 77 different poems. That word gets used. Now, whatever it is, talent, whatever you want to call it, I kept it in my hand, notice capitalized. I never put it down. I did not dare to eat or sleep. We can't help but think of T.S. Eliot's Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, do I dare to eat a peach? Do I dare disturb the universe? It's very possible that he gained some insight to the use of the word dare from his study of Emily. I did not dare to eat or sleep. Notice the use of the dashes to make these lines almost breathless, like there was such enthusiasm that I had as a child about whatever the talent was that was given to me by the gods. I did not dare to eat or sleep for fear it would be gone. Now we're going to talk later about Shelley's defense of poetry. And you'll remember we've given comments on it at learnstrong.net. Shelley making the argument for the validity of poets and poetry, but he does make that argument that there comes a moment when the poet can become so distracted he loses his inspiration. And I think Emily is definitely playing a similar game here. Now, Emily once said that no verse in the Bible has frightened me so much from a child as the Matthew 25:29 passage, that story of the talents. In the King James Version, you'll maybe recall this line, from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. This idea repeated again in Matthew 13:12, Mark 4:25, and Luke 19:26. This idea that you could lose the thing that most mattered to you. She says, I held on to it tight. I didn't want to do anything that would take away my ability to enjoy what she would call her richness, her gold. She said, I heard such words as rich, notice in quotation marks, when hurrying to school. Now, I think it's significant that she mentioned school here, because I think she is talking about how early in her life she looked around the room at school and recognized that she was somehow fundamentally different. Notice this idea of school would take us back to maybe Amherst Academy and the like. From lips at corners of the streets, she says, I heard people talk about wealth and richness. This from lips at corners of the street. Notice it's from lips. So it's all about words, right? And wrestled with a smile. Again, back to poem 59 as well as 110 as well as 281 and 284. This idea that language and wrestling with words is what a poet actually does. And she certainly saw it that way. But here it's wrestled with a smile. That is to say, to try and keep from letting anybody know what she understood as rich. And then she'll say it, rich, exclamation point. It's almost, again, like she's talking directly to us and saying, rich, right. Then she'll say it, 'twas myself was rich. And again, the use of the dashes here, brilliant. To take the name of gold. I think it's brilliant what she's doing here. Because if she's referencing that Genesis 32, 22 to 31 passage where Jacob wrestles with the angel, you will remember that at the very end of that story, Jacob is renamed as what? Israel. So notice she uses the word name here, to take the name of gold. Now, of course, you take the L out of the word gold and you get God. It's fascinating, the game that she's playing here, to mention now the economics of poetics, if you will. To take the name of gold and gold to own. So she's back then to this thing about, I kept it in my hand, the coin or whatever, and I wouldn't set it down. The gold to own in solid bars here, maybe speaking of her poetry. And of course, bars is fascinating because that's not only gold, but that's also bars of music, poetic music, right? And then she'll finally say it, the difference. Go back to poem 305 to see her use of that word difference, the way that she compares things. The difference made me bold. Now it's fascinating because she says here, the last word of this poem, bold. In other words, I was bold to believe in my talent. But notice in poem 452 that we just did a few seconds ago, she says that she feared the sea too much. In other words, she fears when it comes to love, but she's bold when it comes to her poetic genius, her inspiration, if you will. And I think that's the point at 2A, that inspiration is precious, and it is something which can go quickly. And I think Emily had some concerns about this in terms of the possibility that it might not stick around, this inspiration that she had. Emily had to know that what she was doing with these poetic lines was different from anything that she was reading poetic-wise. And, of course, a few people that she showed her stuff to would say the same to her. Dude, what's up with all of these strange syntactical lines, the dashes, the way in which you play games with words unlike any other poet? And, of course, we say today, this may be why Emily could be considered the greatest poet of the English language, the way she plays with the words. That is to say, her solid bars of gold, right? At 2B, well, obviously it's a riddle poem. What is the it that she's in reference to? And I love the language of economics as well. It's almost as if a coin, my Emily group suggested this to us, to me, that maybe it's like a coin. You know how a child gets a coin and wants to go and spin the coin, but doesn't want to spin the coin and holding on to it tight in the hand. I love that word picture. At 3A, I mentioned Shelley's defense of poetry, and I think it very much works here. I mentioned, of course, that Milton was also a poet that was very much influenced by this, and I think Milton himself, we see this in the sonnet on his blindness, that Milton himself was deeply, deeply concerned about the whole question of inspiration and whether it would stick around or not. Of course, that famous poem with the word patience there, we've given for lectures at learnstrong.net. And then finally, I'd like to think about Joyce as we're making connections here. And James Joyce and his portrait of the artist as a young man, where the same concern is there. Stephen Dedalus doesn't want to give up that inspiration that he recognizes he's different. He knows that. He will fight to his death to defend that Byron is the better poet than Tennyson. And yet, right? Can I still have that poetic capacity? Am I going to be a writer all my life? Am I going to be able to be that spokesperson for Ireland? Finally, at 3B, to somehow relate to a poem like this, it's possible that some of you will report that at a very young age, you knew there was something special that you had. That in fact, the gifts that you had were there from the very beginning. If that's true of you, how do you relate to this poem in that regards? And finally, question, do you think of inspiration, do you think of talent as a blessing or is it a curse? I hope that Emily's maybe helping you to see that it can be both, right? Thank you.